Before we get into naming, let's talk about what a transition metal is. So a transition metal is the middle group of the periodic table that is now highlighted in red. There are a couple of exceptions. The first exception is zinc. It always creates a positive 2 charge. The next exception is silver, and it always creates a positive 1 charge. So these are going to have only 1 charge, and they don't need Roman numerals when you're naming them. The next exception is that tin, lead, and bismuth are treated as transition metals even though they're not actually in the transition metals group. So Sn, Pb, and Bi will all follow transition metal naming rules even though technically they're not transition metals. So let's go with naming compounds with transition metals. Again, I can give you the name and ask for the formula, or give you the formula and ask for the name. Let's start with the first one first, and our example here is lead 2 chloride. The Roman numerals tells us what the charge for lead is. Remember, we have to have Roman numerals because transition metals make more than 1 charge, and that charge has to be identified with Roman numerals. So step number 1 is to write the symbol and the charge for the metal and the nonmetal. So from the periodic table we know that lead is Pb and chlorine is Cl. The Roman numeral 2 tells us lead is a +2 charge, and its location on the periodic table tells us chlorine is a -1 charge. Step number 2 is to cross the charges and make them subscripts for the elements just like we've been doing. So we'll get rid of the symbols and cross those 2 numbers. Remember, we don't write 1 as a subscript, so we're going to get rid of it. And we're going to slide Pb next to Cl, and lead 2 chloride is PbCl2. While we're on the topic of Roman numerals, if you don't know what Roman numerals are, here's a list of all the ones you need to know. It's just 1 through 6. More examples of these. First one is iron 3 oxide. The symbols for iron and oxygen are Fe and O. The Roman numeral 3 tells us that iron is a +3 charge, and we know that oxygen is a -2 charge. So we're going to cross those 2 charges and make them subscripts, and iron 3 oxide is Fe2O3. Next is mercury 2 sulfide. We know mercury and sulfur are Hg and S. The Roman numeral 2 tells us mercury is a +2 charge. We know that sulfur is a -2 charge, so we're going to cross those 2 charges and make them subscripts. Remember, we have to simplify. Okay, so we're going to get rid of the 2 2's, and mercury 2 sulfide is just HgS because we've simplified. Let's move on to giving you the formula and asking you for the name. So our example of PbCl4 here, step number 1 is to name the elements using previously known rules. So we know we're going to name the metal, which is lead, and add IDE to the nonmetal. So we have lead chloride. The second step is to reverse the cross to make the subscript now the charge. So we're going to take this 4 subscript and reverse the cross, undo the cross, and make 4 the charge for lead. Charges for polyatomic ions and nonmetals are not necessary because all we need is the name. And so we're going to place the 4 charge between the metal and the nonmetal as a Roman numeral, so lead chloride becomes lead 4 chloride. Because of these, you have Cu3PO42, so we're going to name our metal and our nonmetal, so we have copper sulfate, and then we're going to take the 2 subscript outside of sulfate, and we're going to reverse that cross, so copper sulfate becomes copper 2 sulfate. Another example is HgO. Now, you're going to notice that there's nothing down there for subscripts. And when that happens, there's 2 possibilities. Either they're both 1s and we've gotten rid of them, or you have to look at the nonmetal charge to figure out what the charge for the metal is. The oxygen is a -2 charge. We know that the first possibility of them both being 1s is out. So they have to be the same, but they're simplified. So because we know oxygen is a -2 charge and they've been simplified, we know that mercury has to be a +2, so it's mercury 2 oxide.
Created using Powtoon.